So we're recording now. And again, welcome to School16. We're an alternative education organization that helps people make inroads and land opportunities for non-technical roles in tech. And today specifically, we're going to be talking about how to stand out to tech employers to land interviews. Obviously, the job market is very competitive these days. That doesn't mean that necessarily you're competing against people that are super high quality all the time, by the way. But oftentimes employers do have to sift through a lot of resumes, look through a lot of potential candidates just to get to the diamonds in the rough. And you can make it easier for them to actually stand out. By taking some of the principles that we're going to review in the session today, we strongly believe you can rapidly accelerate your inroads into certain organizations. In other words, we're going to be talking about some quote unquote hacks that you can use to land opportunities and to obviously start off by landing interviews and getting in front of people in the first place.
Now, the reason why we focus on specifically on non-technical roles, certainly there are people in this room that are more technical than others. But what we found, at least through our careers, is that there's just a lot of non-tech roles and there are not as many qualified candidates to fill them. That's number one. Number two, they're typically a little bit easier to get into and transition into if you're a career transitioner. And so we have certainly changed careers several times in the last 10 years that we've been in tech. We've seen many of our colleagues successfully go from sales to product or from marketing to customer success or an operations focused role. So they're a little bit more fluid. There's more flexibility. As humans, it's actually proven that most people change careers at least once, but usually twice throughout their lives. And for some people, it's a lot more than that. So just because you decided you want to do something when you're 23 or 27 years old doesn't mean you want to do that for the rest of your life. So I know there are people here of different ages as well. But that's why we focus on non-technical careers. Certainly, there's a lot of amazing programs out there if you want to learn how to code. That's not our focus. That being said, we do talk about certain principles for which technical skills could be helpful, but not necessary.
And there was a question that came in probably into the chat if we can cover some of the differences between some of these different roles. We'll try to touch on them. If there are specific questions that you have that we just did not have time to address, please do ask them when it's appropriate throughout the session, and we'll try to address them then. We do have a lot of content to cover today, but we encourage you to use the chat to ask us questions throughout. We may not stop right away in our tracks to address the question, but we will definitely try to get to it throughout the session. And then there may be times where we ask you to chime in. And again, no pressure, but if you do want to, you can either chime in into the chat with your feedback or thoughts, or unmute yourself and participate that way.
So this is the agenda for the hour. We're in the middle. Actually, we're almost done with the introduction. We're about to jump into the rest of the presentation. And really the focus of today's event is how to stand out to tech employers. I think the conversation that we're going to talk about today is relevant for other types of industries as well, as it relates to actually standing out as an individual to make yourself attractive to employers. But we are going to focus more on tech, obviously, because that's our domain. And we're going to split it into three main core areas that we're going to cover that help people differentiate themselves and stand out. One is talking about what practical knowledge and skills are sought after and what employers look for and how you can actually gain them relatively quickly without spending years and years on something. Number two, we're going to talk about how to develop and leverage a particular domain expertise and why that's important and how to do that in a way that's not necessarily intimidating or daunting. But domain expertise and being able to communicate a domain expertise is important. And then finally, we're going to talk about how you can demonstrate an ability to be a self-starter. You might have heard that before as a label for someone. Generally, it's viewed as a positive trait in tech and technology jobs in particular. Being a self-starter is actually, at least in our experience, very valued. And so we're going to talk about ways to do that as well and demonstrate that as well.
We didn't add this to the agenda, but we will also, toward the end of the class today, will mention and discuss a little bit about how to quickly expand your network. Okay, because there are more efficient ways to do that than others, right? We want to make sure that you're not spinning your wheels, so to speak, but that you are meeting the right types of people to make inroads into opportunities, and also how to adjust your personal narrative. And we'll talk about the importance of that again before the end of the session.
Now, we only have an hour here today, so obviously we're only going to scratch the surface in some of these things. But that being said, we do host events like this and classes like this on a pretty regular basis, almost every week, sometimes every other week. And sometimes it's Vadim and I teaching a session. Oftentimes we bring in a speaker. For example, next Monday, we're going to have a professional in a content marketing role at LinkedIn who went from being a stand-up comic to getting a job at LinkedIn. And he has a really cool story. So we like to bring in professionals that have non-traditional backgrounds that can talk about how they developed and created opportunities for themselves to get into these types of roles. But because we started hosting these events, we also then developed a deeper dive program for people to take advantage of. There are some folks in this call right now that have already participated in our cohort-based program, some that are signed up to participate in our spring cohort. We are taking applications today. Actually, tonight is an application deadline for our spring program, which kicks off on March 22nd. And the application deadline for that is midnight tonight. It just takes about a minute or two to fill out. It's just a way for us to get to know folks, and then we do a quick interview. But essentially, those are classes in sales, marketing, product, and operations, non-technical classes taught by tech professionals. You see some of them here on the screen, where you get to learn directly from them, and then we help people develop their own career narrative so they can increase the likelihood of getting into these jobs quickly, and we help them develop a network as well through our network of employers and instructors as well.
Just so you know, the types of folks that come to these events or the types of folks that are participating in our session come from all walks of life. Sometimes they're career transitioners. They're coming from completely different industries. Sometimes they're just starting off in tech, or they've been in tech for some time, but they want to go into a different discipline. Sometimes they're entrepreneurs that want to become more well-rounded and understand the things that they need to do and the skills they need to acquire to be more effective professionals and to increase the chances of success in their particular roles. So most likely, if you fit one of these profiles, then you'll find at least some value either in our program or in our free events. So we encourage you to continue to come to events like this.
So we want to kick off our conversation with some common misconceptions. And again, it is a conversation. We do want you to ask questions in the chat, and later on at the end of the call, we'll give you an opportunity to unmute yourself if you have particular questions. But let's dive into some of the common misconceptions that people have that it's really our mission at School16 to dispel. In fact, this is part of the reason why Vadim and I started this organization. We've been working with professionals for quite some time, both at the university level and outside of it, both with startup entrepreneurs and founders and people that want to get into tech roles. And we find people unnecessarily over and over again disqualifying themselves from opportunities before an employer can disqualify them. And we don't want that to happen. The worst thing you can do is decide for yourself that you don't deserve a certain opportunity. And certainly there's a lot of misconceptions related to that. One of them is that only full-time jobs count on your resume. And we actually just published an article about this on Harvard Business Review that I think some of the folks on this call probably read. But the people that are the most savvy, that oftentimes get the best opportunities, are the ones that know how to talk about themselves and their experiences, even if those experiences were relatively short term, or even if they were projects that they worked on independently or initiatives that took of their own. So full-time jobs are not the only thing that counts on your resume. And if you have a situation, let's say you decided you wanted to have kids and you had 2 years where you didn't have a full-time job, that doesn't mean that for those 2 years you didn't do anything. Maybe you volunteered at certain organizations. Maybe you did contract gigs during that time. Those things count on your resume. You just have to know how to tell that story in a way that makes an employer feel like you learned something. So that's number one misconception of, just because you didn't do something full-time doesn't mean it's not qualified to be on your resume or doesn't make you qualified for a particular role. The second misconception is that you can only use your immediate network and your close network to be able to get opportunities. A lot of people think that, only someone that has seen the quality of my work is someone I should ask for an introduction to a job, or somebody that can help me get leads for a particular opportunity. I can tell you firsthand that is not the case. And I can tell you our students that have gone through our program firsthand will tell you that is not the case. You can reach out to people that you have met once at an event and talk to for 5 minutes. But if you made a good impression on them, that is somebody that's qualified, and that's somebody that could help you get an opportunity. You could reach out to people that have never interacted with you before. Maybe they liked a post of yours on LinkedIn. Maybe you just liked one of their posts and you never interacted with them otherwise. But cold outreach is also possible to use to develop your network to gain ability to create opportunities. When Vadim and I first moved to New York, we knew nobody. We had no jobs and we knew nobody. And that was 8 years ago. And within a couple of months, we were able to develop a network that generated jobs and opportunities for us because we weren't afraid to ask for it. So that's the number one. That's the number 2 point. Don't be afraid to ask for help just because you don't know somebody super well. Number 3, I need years of experience to get most opportunities in tech. And most employers are going to ask for years of experience to say that I'm qualified. Yes, we all are very frustrated when we're at an entry level or when we're transitioning careers and we see that somebody says, you need 3 to 6 or 10 years of experience in something to be able to even apply to that job. We can tell you firsthand that oftentimes, and we've created job specs ourselves for companies that we worked and hired people. That's why we know this. Can tell you firsthand that oftentimes those bounds are flexible, and oftentimes people put that just to basically not have a bunch of people apply that have no experience at all and no exposure at all. That doesn't mean that your short-term project or something that you worked on for 6 months where you actually owned the entire thing end to end didn't make you qualified. Sometimes a 6-month experience can be more valuable than 3 years doing something. So don't decide for yourself before an employer can decide whether, you fit that criteria just because you don't have years and years of particular experience. It's more important what the quality of your experience was like and how you communicated rather than a certain amount of years spent in it.
And yes, Romina, to your point, it is annoying when somebody says you need an MBA or you need consulting experience or you need something or it's preferred for that role. But again, as Sergey said, it's often done in that job description to dissuade completely irrelevant people from applying. And what we're going to talk about today is how to make yourself relevant, even if you don't have those specific labels, for example, on your resume. Okay. Usually there are exceptions to the rules. The number one thing that any organization cares about is, can this person come in and solve problems for me? That's it.
Any questions on the misconceptions here, aside from Ramina's question? Or any other misconceptions perhaps that you have heard of, but you saw that are not actually true yourself? There's a lot of these, there's things that are on paper kind of make sense as we get into certain careers. And there's things that you actually experience in real life and see that it's actually, practically speaking, not what happens, which is why you look at someone in their LinkedIn and you know that person. You're like, how did that person get such a cool job? I know that they're not that qualified. It's because they didn't prevent themselves from applying and decide for themselves that they're not a fit, right? They took a chance and maybe they were somehow really good at communicating their value. And I think one pattern that you'll notice with us and everything we talk about here at School 16 is actually communication oftentimes is more important than anything else.
John asked if it's better to have a one-page resume or two. The one-page resume rule, people have different opinions on that. Our opinion is it's a bit of a thing of the past. Now, that doesn't mean that you should have a 5-page resume if you only have a couple of years of experience, right? It should really match your level of experience. That said, oftentimes these things are done electronically now. And so if your resume exceeds a few pages, or I should say 1 page, I really wouldn't go more than 2 pages. But if your resume exceeds 1 page, I would prioritize having enough depth in the descriptions of your previous experience than maybe having surface level bullet points or descriptions. That's where, it might make more sense to have a second page.
The one thing that I'll sort of add a caveat to is that obviously at some point, a human's going to look at your resume and they may be looking at 30 of them or 50 of them. So you do want to make sure at the very least that it's scannable, that somebody can look at it and certain things just jump out at them. And if you don't feel like you can get a good sense of yourself, whether your resume is scannable enough and things jump out, you can just give it to some folks, some of your friends, and see if they look at it and ask them what jumps out at you. And if it's taken them super long to see anything that jumps out, maybe it is a little bit too verbose and you want to slim it down a little bit there. Maybe there's too many irrelevant things in there.
And there's formatting, that's where formatting makes sense, but don't reinvent the wheel. There's a ton of templates out there online that are available. You can straight up copy them. That's what most people do anyways. All right.
So the first part that we were going to talk about is gaining practical knowledge and skills for specific roles. By the way, don't feel like you have, if it helps to take notes, you should take notes. You don't have to copy this stuff word for word. We will send you this video recording and we're going to go through each of these points as well here. So you don't have to feel like you have to read this as we talk. But the way that we talk about when we say practical knowledge and skills for specific roles, we're talking about when an employer is looking at you and your experience, or when an employer is interviewing you, how are they actually able to put you and visualize you into that particular role? How can you articulate in your narrative that the things that you have done will make you immediately productive in a particular role? And so that's what really we're talking about when we say practical knowledge and skills for specific roles. We're not talking about certain languages that you learn how to code in. We're talking about what practically makes you able to do a job. And that also means that you hear about it from, let's say, you might have heard it from a friend of yours or from an employer that you might have talked to that's been helping you out with applying to certain jobs. But that's why people say oftentimes you want to make sure you customize your resumes or your cover letters to particular jobs. People don't care about all of the things that you've done. They care about the things that are relevant to that particular role that they're recruiting for, which is why having focus is important and narrowing it down a little bit is important, because over time, you want to be selective about the things you apply to, and that'll give you the ability to actually communicate the things that are most relevant and the stories that are most relevant in your applications, rather than just trying to list everything off.
So if you want to think about what skills, what practical skills, again, skills that can be directly relevant to a specific role, when somebody reads that part of your resume, they think, okay, wow, when they're going to come in, they're going to do X, Y, Z right away. That is essentially what we're referring to here. You need to ask yourself the following questions, right? Because the first step before you can develop that skill or even highlight that skill based on your previous experience, if you already have some experience in the market, is what am I good at? Right? That's fundamentally what you're starting with. What am I good at? And what am I uniquely better at than most other people? So I would ask myself, am I an operational or systems oriented thinker, right? Am I an organizer? Do I like to get people together? Do I like to create communities, even if that's done outside of my full-time job? Am I customer service oriented? Do I really care about my customer? Do I care about a specific customer? For example, me and Sergey for years worked with entrepreneurs. We really deeply care about entrepreneurs. We worked with venture funds to access entrepreneurs. We work with entrepreneurs that are students in the university ecosystem. We just care about it. If an entrepreneur calls me at 10 o'clock at night and asks me a question about IP law, I will pick up the phone and I will answer, because we do deeply care about that. These questions can then start guiding you about how to target the opportunities that you're going to be looking for, and how to target the skills that you should highlight as part of your background. Again, some other things that you can think about is, do I like tinkering with things, right? Do I like solving technical problems? I don't necessarily mean coding, but what I mean is, if I had a Wi-Fi router that hasn't worked for a day or two, do I sit there for 6 hours until that problem is fixed, right? Again, that'll start giving you hints as to what skills you innately have and what you're better at than most other people. And as you can see here, there are other things here that can allude to other roles. Like, for example, a lot of operational roles out there, obviously a lot of product roles out there, depend on your ability to look at and analyze and synthesize data. If you are inherently good at that, or at least spend some time with that in your roles, even if that wasn't part of your full-time job, you should be highlighting that on your resume for product management jobs, for certain operations roles as well, like revenue operations roles, to stand out for employers.
Another thing I'll add is that a lot of people think that if they write, let's say in a cover letter, let's say they're applying for an operations role, they will write something like, I'm a very organized person and I'm a systems thinker. But that tells me nothing, right? A lot of people think they're organized and a systems thinker, but tell me a quick story about how you're organized. For example, I had a gentleman reach out to me who wanted an internship or a consulting opportunity at School16. And he said to me something like he's organized and he's really good as a project manager. And when I read that, my initial reaction was like, okay, great, but like that tells me nothing. But then he expanded on it and said that he actually managed a project at his company that was a rollout for a particular product, where he had to manage 40 different stakeholders. There were some direct reports and there was other external stakeholders that he had to manage communication with. And when he said he had to manage communication with 40 stakeholders to get a project done, even though that was a short-term project, that was incredibly impressive to me. And that proved to me that, in fact, he probably is quite organized versus if he just said that he is. So remember that the way that you convince employers that you can actually hit the ground running right away is by showing, not just telling.
So we're going to pause here before sharing some stories about how we were able to do this in our careers to get into different opportunities before moving on in the slides here. Does anybody have any questions? You can drop them in the chat or unmute yourself. We'll give you 10 seconds. Okay, great. We're going to move on. Again, if you have a question, we don't want to skip over it, just drop it into the chat. So a quick few stories. Sergey and I both started off our careers in finance. Like most other people, we realized not for us, especially the type of finance work that we were doing. And we realized that we want to get out of it as soon as possible. So for me, that meant getting into tech. I loved the idea of startups. I've had cousins that were building startups. I wanted to get into tech, but I was coming from a finance background. I was pursuing my CFA, Chartered Financial Analyst exam. Did not look like someone that should be in tech. And the easiest role for me to get into that seemed like it didn't have a lot of requirements for experience was sales. Now, I had some internship work in college that could speak to that, but I just could not get any interviews. I was applying to different jobs. I talked about the different cold emails and cold calls that I did in college, and I guess my resume was not speaking to me as an expert, probably because my experience was relatively surface level. So what I did, a quick hack that I did that literally took only a few months that ended up working in terms of getting me a bunch of interviews and then landing an opportunity at a pretty big company doing direct sales with a nice base and a salary, a commission salary, was I was fortunate enough to have a friend that was working on a startup that just raised a couple $100,000. Now, they had already 5 people on the team and some contractors, and I knew that that few $100,000 wasn't going to be enough for them to pay a bunch of other people. And I already had a full-time job. But luckily, he had an office right down the street from the finance company that I worked at. And also, luckily, I got out of work at 5 p.m. And also, luckily, when I talked to him, I found out they had clients on the West Coast. So I told him, hey, I would love to volunteer for you and work for free. I don't really need anything in return. The only thing I ask is that your director of sales gives me some pointers on my sales process and trains me a little bit throughout this process. And he, of course, agreed because it was free help and because he was a friend. And so I would go to his office after work a couple of times a week. And it was only for a few hours a week as well. But I was forced to get on the phone. I was forced to learn what it was like to cold call, which, especially 10 years ago or so when I was doing this, was an important part of a salesperson's job. And after that, I was able to take that 2 or 3 month experience, put it on my resume, and immediately I started getting interviews because it was fresh experience and because clearly I sounded like I knew what I was talking about because after a few months of doing it, I actually did become somewhat of a domain expert.
And so there's countless other examples of transitioning into other different roles. So Vadim and I spent a couple of years in sales, but we realized, like many people, once you spend 2, 3 years in sales, it can be quite, it gets boring sometimes. It is quite an exciting job. You can make a lot of money. And if that drives you, that hunter mentality, it can be great. But after a while, smiling and dialing 100 cold calls a day gets a little bit old. So we decided both independently that we wanted to get out of sales. For Vadim, that was getting into a sales engineering role because he wanted to get into a product role.
Now, I did not really have much experience with product. We tinkered around with some ideas and they were on my resume, but it wasn't that deep. But I did work at a startup as a director of sales. There were 5 people. I was the only one getting paid. The director title didn't mean much, but it was my title nonetheless. And what I did make sure to do is I asked the CEO if I could speak to the CTO, have a weekly meeting with the CTO to give him feedback on the conversations I was having with the people that I was trying to close, with the customers I was trying to bring in. And guess what? That's actually what a product manager does, right? Customer validation, talking to customers. I was doing it in a sales capacity, but because I actually did get to work directly with that CTO, I went ahead and added that to my resume. And I started exploring opportunities in sales engineering and product management. And I did end up landing a role, and that's how I ended up in New York City for a video software company doing sales engineering. Again, I only had experience doing sales, so of course it was a bridge there. It was somewhat relevant, but I didn't have any experience doing technical sales. And I was fortunate enough to find a small company where their VP of sales just was not technical at all, and their CTO was experiencing a lot of pain on a day-to-day basis trying to navigate with this VP of sales all the pitch conversations they were having. So again, they saw a direct way that I could solve problems for them by learning from that CTO. And when I got in there, I basically absorbed as much information from her as possible. I kind of became the go-to product specialist. Over time, I ended up getting a VP role there and becoming a lead product director as well, simply because I made sure to get close to that CTO and I learned that technical work on the job. But again, I was leveraging what I already had to get this opportunity. And some other things that I put on my resume at the time is I built a couple of WordPress sites. So I learned myself how to build WordPress sites. There was a little bit of custom coding that I had to learn to do that. basically by reading Stack Overflow and different forums. And again, I went ahead and added that to my resume, even though it was just side work that I was doing.
Yeah, so it just shows the importance of even the short-term projects or the independent projects that you take on that are not part of your job description. Oftentimes, those are the things that convince a future employer that you can immediately be productive when you join their firm, even if you're changing careers. For me, I wanted to get closer to the entrepreneurship side of things and actually investing in startups. And so Vadim and I actually worked on a startup company, a software business for a couple of years in between jobs there. And we ended up hiring an engineer and building a product and getting some customers. It wasn't trivial. But it wasn't a successful startup that made it on TechCrunch and raised millions and millions of dollars. But it was something that we worked on for a couple of years and we actually had real output for. And I used that experience to get a job at a national nonprofit called Venture for America, because they needed somebody to run entrepreneurship programs for them. And they wanted somebody with experience working in startups and actually starting a company of their own, which I had both. Now, trust me, I had to do a lot of convincing to get that job. But once I was in that job, about a year later, I heard from my CEO that he was interested in actually starting a venture capital fund internally at the nonprofit. Now, I had wanted to learn a lot about VC. I had already been consuming stuff about venture capital on the side pretty much every day because I was interested in it. So I had some baseline knowledge, even though I had never invested in startups before. No one else at the company really did. And so I raised my hand and I said, listen, whatever you need help on in order to put together this venture capital fund, I'll do it. And it turned out he needed help on everything and he didn't have a lot of time. So he actually ended up letting me do pretty much everything when it came together, putting together this venture capital fund. I dealt with the lawyers to put it together. I dealt with the limited partners to actually get the money. I actually helped deploy the capital. All of a sudden, I developed within a period of just a few months this experience and expertise around investing. And then I ended up moving on to another organization where I've been a venture capital investor now for a couple of years, all without a whole lot of experience being a venture capital investor.
We're going to address the questions that are coming into the chat here, but the moral of these stories is take the opportunities to take on new experiences if you can. If you're currently in a job and you feel like you have a gap on your resume, you want to take on a new skill, you need to be proactive in seeking out the responsibilities that will give you that experience, even if it's not part of your title, even if it's not part of your full-time job. It's okay. That is absolutely something you can and should highlight in your resume. And to address Isabel's question, if it's a short-term side project, do you have to mention that on your resume? Our recommendation is that you should. You don't have to do anything, but our recommendation is that you should. That is what's going to give you a leg up. That is, again, one of those quick ways to gain and display experience, even if somebody didn't give you the opportunity, right? Not waiting for permission, but just doing it yourself.
I'll add a caveat because I think Isabel might be asking if it's really short term, do I have to say how long it was? Like that was really short. Well, I can tell you that you don't have to say like exactly the amount of hours that you spent on it. No, and no one's going to care or check. I had a period of time where I had a resume gap for like 6 months, and I spent 2 months of it traveling in Brazil. And while I was in Brazil, I reached out to a couple of accelerator programs there, incubators, essentially entrepreneurship incubators, and asked to volunteer for them. And one of them ended up paying me for a small contract that I did. And I worked with a couple of founders there. Now, cumulatively, I probably did maybe a couple of weeks of work, but those couple of weeks of work spanned couple of months. And so on my resume, I had that I did consulting work in Brazil for a couple of months, right? I didn't say that I only worked with 2 startups and I only did maybe a couple of weeks of work. So again, the experience itself and the value that I was able to bring to those startups and those incubators while I was in Brazil was much more interesting to the employer. And they didn't even ask me, how many hours. Nobody's going to ask you exactly how many hours did you spend on that project. And if they do, you can be honest with them and tell them, but you should emphasize the impact that you had, not the hours.
And another idea is if it's something that you worked on our side or might be currently still working on, even if it's a few hours a week or a few hours every few weeks, then you can just put a start date and say that you've been doing it until present. And there you go. You just solve the issue of the duration of time if you're concerned about that. A few other questions I'll address is when we're talking about, we're going to be throwing out some terms today, as we already have. When we mention things like product, we do mean software products. For the most part, B2B and B2C, business to business and business to consumer. The technical capabilities that I learned through WordPress specifically was PHP, right? A lot of WordPress is in PHP, including the databases, and then the front end work. It's a CMS where If you ever used WordPress, you have to wrestle with their plugins and the like, and use the inspect element in Chrome, the inspect tool element in Chrome a lot. I learned CSS, HTML, JavaScript all through that experience. And then in my other job, I learned a little bit of Perl, a little bit of other tools basically that they used 100 years ago that I don't even remember now.
No, it's
They're
not
not
that
as relevant.
it's not that Vadim was fluent in HTML and CSS and could write code from scratch when he got that job. He learned how to edit it basically and read some forums and blogs about how to do it, right? And he used it to actually be able to make fixes to existing templates on WordPress, right? But that was enough to get his foot in the door to a job that he actually got more experience in it, and then he actually became a little bit more fluent in it.
Yeah, and for example, product managers, they often have to deal with large data sets. I've had to do that in my jobs as well. I had to pick up a little bit of SQL or MySQL, but did I learn how to write, complicated SQL queries from scratch? No, I would usually look at what other engineers or our DevOps guy came up with, and then I would kind of recreate them and wrestle with them a little bit and ask for help if I needed to. And that's how I essentially became an expert in SQL, which is pretty technical as well. So some of these things, again, you just need to expose yourself with, and then when in doubt, ask for help.
Great. So we just want to show a little bit about, because we just talked about all these different skills that you could develop quickly and acquire quickly on the side even. But here's just an example of how you might display that, whether it's on LinkedIn or as a bullet point on your resume. And this is a real example. Some of these are real examples of how Vadim and I have done it, right? So that top one, for example, someone might think, okay, well, you worked at a startup, you did a project at Startup Weekend over a weekend. Is that meaningful? Well, launching something from concept to prototype in the course of a couple of days, and then working with engineers. There were all the bullet points on there that we talked about, working with an engineer and developer to create the prototype and actually launch it and get some users for it. Even though we ended up working on that project for maybe about a couple months, having that keyword prototype in the resume, I'm sure actually got a lot of interviews for Vadim, because a lot of jobs look for your ability to prototype and test. Even in let's say product heavy, like somewhat technical product management roles, if you have some experience prototyping and launching products, even if you're not technical, but just creating visual prototypes yourself on like design tools, like let's say Canva or Figma or Proto.io, which are all free tools you can use to make mock-ups of things, that's enough to say that you've prototyped something. It doesn't mean it had to be something that you deployed to thousands of people. It just means that you created something, maybe showed it to a couple people. That's already a prototype. There's a couple other examples here, Vadim. I don't know if you want to walk through some specific ones that you mentioned.
Yeah, again, some of these are pretty basic experiences, but think about how that applies to your experience and your background, even if you have to kind of dig in and go back a couple of years and think about what you may have done in the past. But if you come from a specific sector like the fashion industry, which we're going to talk about in a couple of minutes here, and you actually built a little bit of community, it doesn't matter if it was a huge community. Again, this is tangible. These are tangible results that you were able to get. If you created a blog, if you created a podcast, you are a creator. We're going to talk about that a little bit later again, but this is how you would display some of these practical skills. You built an online fashion brand, and here's what you were able to achieve. You have to show numbers. You have to show the impact that you had, and you have to show the details. By showing here in that last bullet that I partnered with Instagram influencers with a 10,000 plus following, I'm conveying a lot of things here. I'm conveying that I knew to do that tactically. I'm conveying that I was able to be persuasive enough to convince these folks to share on my end. I'm conveying that I didn't have the fear of reaching out and getting rejected. And I actually, as a self-starter, was able to do that. So in a few short sentences, you can oftentimes be very impactful to the reader of the resume. And it's essentially, obviously, when they're reading your resume to see whether or not they want to talk to you, you're just building curiosity, right? You can worry about later. We're going to talk about later how to adjust your narrative and how to tell different stories. Somebody asked earlier, how many stories do you have to prepare? Sometimes it doesn't mean that you have to have a ton of stories. You may have some experience with a particular customer that you worked at in a particular role, and you may have one story that can have different categories to it, right? So you can turn one story into multiple stories as well. The most important thing to keep in mind is to be detail oriented, because that's when somebody sees that you know what you're talking about, and it just compels them to give you the time of day. And because most other people are not doing it, you're again going to be one or two legs up versus the other contenders for these roles.
Right. And we, just a quick example, we had a woman in our last cohort who came from the entertainment industry, had never really had any tech experience at all, but she spent 8 years in the entertainment industry. And it turned out that she wanted to get into marketing. And then she told us kind of in a offhand conversation that she actually had helped a couple of her brands, like entertainment brands that she knew, on their Instagram accounts and helped manage them a little bit and grow them a little bit. And she really kind of dismissed it, and she didn't even put that on her resume. And just by putting it on her resume and crafting that narrative in a particular way, she was able to get a marketing contract like 2 weeks after, 2 or 3 weeks, I think, after starting a program, just because she was able to actually put that to work, the experience that she really had that was a real thing. So if you think about it, that bullet point that Vadim has there, like he said, it conveys so much. And it ties back to what we were talking about earlier. Somebody that might be hiring someone for a marketing role wants to know that you're resourceful enough to be able to find people with a big following and get your brand in front of them and communicate your brand in a way that's going to make other people want to sign up for that thing and buy that product, right? It sounds simple, but that is already compelling enough to convince them that you're going to be able to do that job right away, even if you don't have years of experience.
For certain product management roles, they really care about you being able to talk to different stakeholders within a company. They really care about you being able to work with different engineers and designers and understanding how their personalities work, understanding how to communicate to various people internally and externally which features need to be prioritized. Even if you did that for a small startup, even if you did that for a small project that you had, you should be putting it on your resume. And if you didn't, start building that experience now. And again, you don't need years of this. You can do it in a very short period of time. This brings me to the question that Molly brought up. How many of these skills that are transferable, which ones of these can we mention? I would urge you to, because remember, these organizations, they want to see that you have a demonstrated ability to do this for other companies or other audiences. So it could be for a segment of consumers, for example. If you did it for yourself, that's great. But if you didn't, then start building that experience for somebody else, to make sure that you can speak to how you were able to come in and add value to other people so that they can see that you can do it for them.
Now, you also, Molly, mentioned, hey, there are practical life skills that you develop just because maybe you didn't have a specific job doing that thing, right? Maybe you're a parent, right? It shows management skills, caring for relatives, customer service skills. I will say that it's not enough just to state those things. You really have to connect the dot for the employer why that's relevant. For example, if you have cared for several sick relatives, you might want to apply for a customer service role for a healthcare organization or healthcare related startup that is specifically for caretakers, right? Because you've been a caretaker yourself and you intimately understand what it feels like to be one. And therefore you really can empathize with their customer. And that may be important to them, right? So you want to be able to get as specific as possible with your life experience and what the organization cares about and really connect the dots for them.
Get specific and get creative. If you were a caretaker, let's say you did it in a nursing home, did you speak to anybody in the operations function at the nursing home and help them systematize anything, help them create additional efficiencies? That may have been one week thing that you did, but that is something tangible now and relevant that you can mention as part of your experience. Hannah mentioned, what do you think about bringing a portfolio to an interview? Absolutely, you can bring and have a portfolio to reference. It obviously depends on the job, right? The job that you're applying. Let's say if you're a designer, of course, that's going to make a lot of sense. I would say have that stuff handy and bring it up if it's relevant or if it comes up in the conversation. But of course, that can add as additional ways to prove that you've been able to accomplish something.
Uche asked how much detail is necessary to when you're communicating these skills and the different things that you've done. I would say that, the number one thing that's important to remember is not necessarily how much information you should give, but how much relevant information you should give. You remember when you're going through, let's say, even an interview process, you are dealing with a human, and that human may have interviewed 10 people before you. If you start talking about your life story, they will probably get bored. They're not going to know what's relevant to them. They may zone out. I mean, they're just human, right? And so you want to make sure that you keep them excited and you keep talking about something that's specifically relevant to them and to that job. And the most exciting stories, that's something that we talk about in our program, this concept of a highlight reel. How do you talk about things that are only most relevant to the person that you're talking about, and only include the things that are relevant? I will add one more thing because it pains me when I talk to someone and they tell me that, oh, I really want a product management job, but I know that I'm not qualified because I don't have any product experience. Again, don't make that decision for the employer. Yes, there are some product roles that require certain specific technical skills. Many don't. Some companies really likes people that have experience talking to customers and dealing with customers, and that's way more important to them than any one technical skills. Some companies look for people that have a lot of cross-functional experience managing projects and communicating with engineers and salespeople and other people in an organization, and that's more important to them than knowing, how to work with a database. So just because you don't have one skill doesn't mean other skills that you have are not going to be relevant for other employers. That means you do have to get good at filtering for employers that your experience might resonate with the most. So don't make blanket decisions on something you're not qualified for just because you heard somebody say it or you read something on a job description.
Okay, so next we're going to talk about becoming a domain expert. And part of the reason why we talk about that is actually going to piggyback to what was already kind of mentioned throughout. And that is, we are talking about how to stand out and land interviews, but people are curious, how you behave in an interview as well. And the number one thing that I will say is to remember that it is a discussion. It is a conversation. You're coming in as an expert in the end of the day, an expert in something. Maybe you have a specific set of skills. Maybe you have a deep understanding about a particular sector, but you know things and you have value to offer to other people. So you should be coming into that conversation with that level of confidence, even if you don't have a lot of experience. And that way you'll make sure that it's going to be more conversational. You'll make sure that you're not just waiting for the person to ask you the next question, that you're being truly inquisitive about the role or the sector or their customer or their product or whatever it is, so that it's more of a back and forth. And they're going to walk away from the conversation feeling more positive and more confident about taking you on to the next level, because you sounded like you knew what you were talking about and you weren't afraid to take the lead in the conversation when it made sense.
So again, a lot of folks, when they think about domain expertise, they think that only things that you had professional experience apply. But I already gave you the example of the venture capital experience that I had. I really was tasked with that role because I was the only one in the company willing to do it. And I had done a lot of independent research on my own over the course of the previous year. And actually, I had tried raising money for a previous startup. So I actually kind of knew how venture capitalists made decisions because I heard a lot of no's from them. So I had personal experience in that, right? So I used that experience, even though I'd never been in VC, but I used all the research and all the conversations I had with people to develop that domain expertise, right? So just because I didn't have the job or the work experience doesn't mean that I didn't have the expertise that I could speak to intelligently. So if you think that you can talk about a topic intelligently, to me, that is already enough for you to consider yourself a domain expert. In fact, there are probably a lot of topics that you know more about than 90% of the population, just because you were curious about it and you dove deep, or you've done projects, or you did a lot of research. And to me, that is a domain expertise.
That's right. If you spend even a weekend diving really deep into a particular subject, I promise that you already know more about it than most other people. And that does count for something. So if you're thinking about what should I be a domain expert in, or what am I a domain expert in, or what sectors or specific industries maybe I should apply to because I'll have a leg up, because I'll know more than maybe a bunch of other people that are applying for the same exact role, start asking yourself the following questions. What are you deeply interested in? Right? I mean, you just spend so much time thinking about it every single day. Even if it's something like cars, that counts, right? Because you're already a domain expert in cars. Well, maybe you can apply to startups that service the automotive industry, right? And then now they don't have to spend months teaching you about their industry. What do you spend a lot of time thinking about? What kind of content do you consume, right? You just really enjoy reading about blockchain. Or you really enjoy reading about equity investing. Again, these are going to start giving you hints about the types of industries where you're going to be a better fit than a lot of other people, which is going to shorten the path for you to get into those different opportunities. And the last lens I would say you should look through is, outside of maybe what you spend a lot of time thinking about, is where do you already have a deep network, or at least a network where you can reach out to several people and connect over a call to learn more about either jobs in that field or the industry in general, or trends that they're seeing, or what have you. These hints are also going to help you figure out how you should prioritize your outreach strategy when you're looking to expand your network further as well. Start with the people that you know. We'll talk about that a little bit later in this conversation. Just so you know, folks, we're going to be going a little over the hour-long mark. So if you can stick around with us after the hour, we do encourage you to do that. If not, again, we're going to actually, Kristen, if you don't mind dropping the survey link right now into the chat so that folks have it. If you fill out the survey link, we will provide you with this recording if you do have to jump right at 7.
One quick example of the domain expertise example that Vadim just gave. We had a gentleman named Jeffrey Love that came to an event here at School16 a couple of maybe a month ago or so. and he was a customer success leader at a public company, HubSpot. And we asked him how he got into customer success, and it turned out that he actually used to work at nonprofits. And you would think, how do you go from nonprofit to tech? They're quite different. Well, actually, they're not all that different. A lot of nonprofits operate as startups almost because they don't have a lot of money, and you have to be really resourceful to be able to help a nonprofit grow and have impact. But the way that he did it is because he worked at a nonprofit, he actually worked at a few, he developed a domain expertise around how nonprofits work from the inside, right? He spent years doing it. And so when he was looking for technology companies to join, he was looking for companies that served nonprofits as clients. And it turned out that HubSpot at that time, it was a startup, it was before it went public. It had a whole nonprofit division where they sold their marketing automation software to nonprofits. And here was a guy coming, applying, who had years of experience working for nonprofit. And in fact, he had years of experience dealing with crappy marketing software. He knew exactly the pain that nonprofits experience when it came to dealing with marketing software because he had to do it firsthand. That was the most convincing thing he could say to that company. He ended up joining HubSpot as I believe it was as a customer success manager right away.
Started off as an account manager and then transitioned to customer success.
So at HubSpot, account manager is a little bit more of a junior role, but he started off as in that junior role. He ended up then being promoted to customer success role. He ended up then running a customer success team, and now he runs a fairly substantial, large team. I think he's about 30 years old because the company went public and there was growth opportunities in that company. So he went from nonprofit. He developed that domain expertise because he was in that sector, and he used that to land the job, even though he had no customer success experience and no tech experience at all.
We're going to pause right here to see if folks have any questions. And actually, if you want to unmute yourself, just because we love hearing from other people's stories, if you have a specific story that you would want to share of how you were able to leverage your experience or gain some kind of domain expertise, we would love to hear it. So again, we're going to give some space here for folks to jump in if you'd like.
Or ask questions. Either way.
Okay, so Alia did ask, how do you apply for senior roles without management experience? I've had years of experience, but don't know how to try for management roles without having done it before. That is going to be a little bit hard if you've never managed people, but not impossible. So if you indirectly manage people, which does happen in a lot of roles, right? Where maybe someone didn't report to you, but you did interact with people internally that were junior to you, or you were helping delegate to them, right? Then you were doing some of the work that a manager would have to do, and you can highlight that in your resume. I would say, grow organizations that are growing, that just raise some money, for example, they're going to be hiring a lot of people. They may value you for your domain expertise, and you may convince them that you can grow into a management role without having a ton of experience there. So, if you're only looking at opportunities at massive or established organizations, oftentimes they will look for some management experience. So I would try to adjust the types of opportunities that you're searching for, and that might help as well.
And to Ramina's point in the chat as well, mentoring is a great way to gain some management experience. So that's essentially volunteering to help people out in any kind of way and give them advice. Maybe they want to get into, the job that you're doing and you want to and you're offering to mentor them. You can do that with people in your organization or externally. And I think, Ramina, that's a really great point. Showing that you have an ability to help people and mentor them through their careers is actually an important management skill. Another way Vadim mentioned, startups oftentimes are more likely to give you an opportunity to manage, or you can grow into that. You may have to take an individual contributor role and then ask for that opportunity and get promoted and then go to another job where you're able to manage more people. Sometimes people do that. But the last point that we're going to talk about here in this presentation is actually how to be a self-starter, and actually doing your own individual projects is a way that you can manage people. So for example, when I first came to New York, I wanted to become an event organizer. And when I became an event organizer, I had to hire a bunch of volunteers to help me with these events. No, I did not pay these volunteers, right? They were volunteers, but I had experience managing them, and I had to execute on complex events, and which were projects, to be able to manage them successfully. And certainly talked about that in roles where I wanted to get that management opportunity. So you may have to create that opportunity for yourself if your current organization isn't giving it to you. Like if you're asking your current organization, I want to at least manage some interns this summer to start getting that experience, and they're not giving it to you, you may have to do it yourself or go externally to get that.
Or go to another stakeholder in the company and see if you can get it that way. Okay, so a few other points about displaying domain expertise and a couple of tips. How do you make sure that people don't think that your knowledge or quote unquote domain expertise is superficial? You have to be specific. That has been the theme throughout this conversation, but that should be the main takeaways. So can you be specific and convey that you know what you're talking about, convey that you understand a sector more than most other people, mention specific brands that you may have worked with, refer to specific problems that you encountered in that sector, right? If you, let's say, worked in retail for a number of years, there are certain pain points that a retail organization is going to have. There are certain pain points that a supply chain company is going to have, a media company, right? An advertising position. All these different sectors, if you can speak to the specific problems and pain points, again, you're going to come off as a domain expert. And another quick hack is, of course, to use the vocabulary that these organizations are already using on their website and in their job description, and expand on them, obviously, if possible, to prove, again, that you know what you're talking about.
Just as a quick example, I can't tell you the number of people. Let's say if I put in a job description that communication skills are important and they say how great of a communicator they are, and then they email me and the emails are either super long or they don't give any context or there's a bunch of typos, or we get into an interview and I ask them a simple question and they can't actually like show me that they have done something interesting. They kind of just either list things off and don't tell stories, or they're kind of very silent. You can barely get a word out of them and they can't really give you the context. So again, if you're going to say you're a good communicator, you have to show that you're able to communicate something effectively, concisely, but also impactfully, that I actually get an understanding of what it is that you did. And so that's something that, you learn over time and it requires some practice, but that means that, it's something that you deliberately have to get good at.
And remember, if you do land these opportunities, you have to prepare for them, right? Practice these stories, write them down, role play with your roommate or with your dog, quite frankly, whatever helps, right? Make sure you get it out there, that you get comfortable with saying these things. Record yourself over video if you need to. The most successful people are actually doing these things, and the details here matter. And you should be really, really well prepared. And that oftentimes means going through the motions and actually doing it out loud. We're going to move on and we're going to try to address some questions in a couple of minutes here. But the last thing that we wanted to talk about before giving you some feedback on how to quickly grow your network is the value of being a self-starter. We mentioned this earlier, but being a self-starter does not necessarily mean that you have to go ahead and start a company, that you have to, build a startup and raise a bunch of money. 99% of the population will never do that. And you don't have to do that to be a self-starter, but you can be a starter in other ways. Sergey and I started a podcast a couple of years ago. We did 220 episodes. You better bet that made us domain experts. We interviewed over 100 people for the show. We talked about all sorts of different topics for early stage entrepreneurs. We were invited after a year and a half of doing it to speak at podcast conferences about what it's like to start a podcast and how to interview guests effectively and essentially how to be broadcasters. Before that, we had zero experience doing any of that, right? You can become a domain expert relatively quickly by being a self-starter.
Even things like starting a club at school. We have some students that go through our program that are in grad school or undergraduate, and starting a club means that you have an ability to actually get members. You have an ability to host events and get attendees to the events. You have an ability to reach out to important, influential people and get speakers. These are all things that are actually really valuable to many organizations. A lot of marketing roles require that. A lot of sales and customer focused roles require that. So that's something that you could totally do if you don't have that experience and put that on your resume. And in fact, that's something that you may want to do, especially if you're in a new place and you don't have a big network.
Do you want to be a marketer or some kind of brand specialist? Well, if you have access to certain communities already online, then you should reach out to brands and tell them that you can get them access to these communities and start giving them suggestions for how you can do that. Again, you're not waiting for permission. You're already doing the work that you aspire to do for another organization. You want to become a tech expert? There's so many small businesses out there that know nothing about technology, and you can easily find the ones that have a really poor online presence. You can offer to volunteer for them and again, start building your portfolio to establish yourself as an expert. And again, you doing that, you starting something from nothing, even as an independent contractor, if you will, even as a volunteer, that is going to look really, really impressive to prospective employers.
And which is why actually, like sometimes I have folks coming, like students come to me and they say, I'm really interested in I'll use blockchain as an example, or cryptocurrency, because a lot of people nowadays are interested in that. And they say, I'm thinking about starting a blog. Should I start it? It's kind of hard to stand out nowadays to start a blog. Or I'm thinking about starting a podcast, but it's kind of hard to stand out starting a podcast. It really doesn't matter. You don't have to become the number one, cryptocurrency blog in the world, but having an asset, like a website that you created with your thoughts that you wrote on it, and actually creating that expertise is already valuable enough that someone is going to see that content and think that you are an expert, because you really did develop an expertise there. And that shows your self-starter ability, right? Yeah, maybe you didn't get 1 million followers, but maybe you got 500 or 1,000. You already did a lot more than a lot of people.
Now, if you are going to start a blog or a podcast, make sure that you can record more than 1 or 2 episodes, right? So that's one way to test if you're a domain expert. Can you think of 10, 20, 30, 40 different ideas for what you're going to talk about? But again, your goal isn't to be the biggest in the world. Your goal is to just establish yourself as somebody that knows what they're talking about. And then finally, some tips on how to display these initiatives that you've taken is, don't worry. We're going to reiterate this one more time, a bit of a review. Don't worry if it's not something you did full time for 2 years. It's okay that if you did it, that you did it on the side for a few months. Focus, make sure that when you are talking about what you've done, talk about the impact that you may have had or the reach that you may have had. And even if those numbers are relatively small, even if you targeted or reached very, very small niche communities, that's okay. You did impact somebody. And you did that, again, without asking for permission. And then also be specific in when you're talking about who you reached, right? What audiences did you get access to? Maybe they match the audiences of the organizations that you're looking to get into. Again, that's going to look valuable to prospective employers.
So as you can see, we're talking about here, tech companies and tech organizations and leaders within tech organizations, they really do value that self-startedness and someone taking initiative. But if you think about it, anyone who wouldn't get excited about hearing a story about how you actually grew something from nothing just because you had an idea. That's how people get attention, is they actually show that kind of initiative and that self-startedness. So we encourage anyone, if they have an idea for a certain project that they want to do, whether it's an event or a podcast or whatever it might be, to actually do it and not think about, oh, this needs to get huge. Just start, and then you'll see where it goes from there.
We have a few more slides here for you, and then we'll open it up to final questions at the end for folks that stick around until the end. And we'll just quickly address some of the questions that came up. What are our thoughts on finding jobs through Headhunters? Just make sure they're not wasting your time. Make sure that you are getting some questions answered ahead of the time, and try to control the conversation there as well. A lot of times they're looking at the top of the funnel, so to speak. They're looking to disqualify people as soon as possible. So just make sure that you run the conversation there. But it could be worth your time, though. I wouldn't completely ignore that.
If headhunters are reaching out to you, there's probably something on your LinkedIn or your resume that they think is valuable, right? There's a reason they think they can make money off of you by finding employers for you. So I would just be very clear about what it is that you want, so that they're sending you qualified job opportunities that you're actually interested in. And if they're wasting your time and sending you things that you're not interested in, stop working with them. And then Uche asked the question, what's the process of incorporating yourself? Let's see, self-start abilities into your resume or job hunt. I think we talked about that a little bit in the description that we just did, but essentially we showed a few examples, but happy to dive into that deeper, Uche, with you at a later time.
And for folks that are dropping off, thank you so much for coming, Michael. We look forward to seeing you in a couple of weeks for the start of the program. Yusra, for sure, if you already left, we'll definitely have more events like this. But just to get through the last few pieces of our conversation that we had prepared for you, we do want to leave on talking about building your network, because that might be the single-handedly that will be one of the most important things that you will do to get inroads into different opportunities. People often assume I have to know someone to get my foot in the door into an organization. But what other people don't tell you is there's easy ways to get to know somebody very, very quickly, oftentimes by reaching out completely cold to them. And that can give you inroads into an organization. Yes, absolutely. If you have a warm referral into a role, you will have a leg up. But that doesn't mean you have to already have a massive network, right? Again, oftentimes people that do get these opportunities are super proactive about building these relationships. That's why we spend so much time in the beginning of our program, especially, but throughout as well, making sure that you're constantly doing outreach. You're optimizing the way that you are reaching out to people. But again, we talked about domain expertise. We talked about the skills that are relevant, right? Make sure, in order to increase your chances of getting responses for people that you're reaching out to for informational interviews or to learn about an industry or whatever it is, make sure they somehow match maybe something that you've done, or match your interests or domain expertise that you have established. But the first place you should start is the people you already know. That's the low-hanging fruit. The brands that you may have associated yourself with, right? Have you worked with particular customers in a particular field? They're people that are part of your network. And again, you're just removing obstacles early on in the process, right? Oftentimes you can build your network really, really quickly by asking people for introductions. So start with the people that you know. And then the other thing that I'll say in terms of quickly expanding your network or to create unfair advantages for yourself is you do have to be pretty regimented about this process, right? So if you've never been in sales, you do know that in sales, the most important thing about being successful is consistency of outreach, having an actual process to make sure that you're reaching out to new people on a weekly basis and setting a goal that you're measuring yourself against. Having other goals like how many meetings did I book, right? How many conversations did I schedule with a particular person? So essentially, you're going to have to create something called an outreach funnel, and it might not feel natural to you if you've never been in a sales process, and you might think, well, this seems like a kind of a rigid way to build relationships. But look, we're all busy, right? You may have a full-time job, you might be a full-time student, whatever it is, and it's okay to be very process-oriented about the process of building your network. We had a gentleman named Brett Michaels who spoke to our community a while ago. He's a head of sales at Google. He started off as an engineer and ended up moving into government contract work. But I think he's in his 50s now, but he was always super, super regimented about building his network. He literally had a calendar reminder every single week to reach out to at least a few people in a new sector that he knew nothing about. Now, maybe there were some weeks where he missed that. And he didn't do it. But just by having that top of mind, he made sure that he was executing against that goal proactively. And if you have a goal of getting a job, for example, or transitioning tight job titles, then you do have to create a process around that and be pretty regimented about it as well. And staying consistent is really important. And then also not fearing rejection. A lot of people won't respond to you. A lot of people might not respond to you. They might miss your note, right? And that's okay. Another important thing to do is to follow up if somebody didn't respond. Now, of course, you have to have a balance, right? If it seems like somebody's not responded to you, your efforts might be spent better on somebody else, but following up is pretty important as well, right? Just because you reached out to somebody once doesn't mean you can't ping them again.
Great. So any final questions here? We're a little bit over time, so we want to make sure we give a few more minutes. We're actually going to stop sharing a screen here so you can see us. Here we are. We want to see you as well. Any other questions from folks here? We'll spend just a few minutes here, and Kristen kindly dropped the program link if you are interested in diving deeper in a lot of these topics and learning from experts in the field as well. We have an application deadline tonight. The application takes just 1 or 2 minutes to complete, and then we just interview you to see if you'd be a good fit. So let's see. Romina asked, should we both pivoted multiple times? Very true, several times. Do you have multiple elevator pitches to weave them together or treat them separately based on the role you're looking for? Great questions. Great question. Yes, we do treat them separately in a way because we have transitioned several times. Not every career move that we've made is relevant to the person that we're talking to. And so to stay true to what we just said earlier, to keep it relevant, we only really talk about the stories that we think the person's going to care about. Now, if they're going to ask something about another career pivot they made and asked why, certainly we know exactly how to answer that question. And that comes through practice. We talk a lot about at these events about how to actually talk about the stories of your career changes and what motivated you to do it, why you did it, and what skills you picked up when you did it, right? How it was useful to you. So certainly having backup stories for every move that you made and every experience that you had is great, but you do want to make sure you're spending time on the most relevant ones.
But don't worry about having a bunch of iterations of your elevator pitch. If you have a targeted approach for your job search process, you're probably going to be focusing on one subset of organizations or one type of company or one type of role for any given period of time, 2, 3, 4 weeks. As a matter of fact, we do encourage you to be focused in your approach and not try to spray and pray, but do focus for that one specific thing for at least some time so that you can kind of wrap your head around the types of stories that you want to tell so that you don't have to change your resume a million times, right? Because you're going to be applying to similar roles and the like. So the elevator pitch that you might give at any given time might be the same, but our elevator pitches have always evolved and our domain expertise has always evolved, right? A few years ago, I became a professor and I started teaching. And so now I'm an educator. Before that, I was not. My narrative has changed. I spent a few years working for an ad tech company. Before that, I never knew anything about advertising, right? And so my domain expertise became an advertiser, so to speak. Before that, I worked with publishers, and that's how I, by the way, got that ad tech role, is because I deeply started to understand how publishers work. And before that, knew nothing about that. Sergey spent time in nonprofits, so have I. So your domain expertise, your elevator pitch will change over time. It'll evolve over time. The things you care about will change over time as well. And that should influence what you end up discussing with different people as you build your network and as you get inroads into these different opportunities.
Vadim and I are a little bit obsessive when it comes to personal elevator pitches. We will literally, like, we'll go to an event when that was a thing, and we'll talk to people. Like, we'll come up, one of us will come up and talk to someone. And if I come up to enough people and I feel like I'm not, it's like something's not coming across well, we will go later that night to our hotel room and actually practice changing our pitch and how we talk about ourselves. So the next day at the conference, people are more likely to be interested in us. And hey, that's our approach. We are very regimented when it comes to our elevator pitch, but that's your first impression. And essentially you're trying to make people care about you and your story. And so you want to make sure the story is interesting.
Yeah. And by the way, our path isn't the same path that everybody will follow by any means. And you may have, one main focus that is going to be kind of the heart of your career for a longer period of time. That's totally fine as well. Whatever it makes sense for you. We just happen to get excited about new things every 3 to 5 years, and we transition careers because of that. We do think that the way the job markets are moving, the rapid rate at which innovation is growing, more and more people are going to have to be entrepreneurial about their careers. It's why transferable skills are so important, right? If you've been in sales in one function, you can probably do it for a completely different industry and learn really, really quickly, right? Because you now have the fundamental skills, as you know, to be a salesperson. So we think more and more people are going to have more dynamic careers. They're going to have to be more entrepreneurial about their careers, because the idea of job security is, as we can tell, slowly going away. But that doesn't mean that your path is going to be the same exact as everybody else's. Great. So we're going to one more time ask if anybody else has any final questions. Kristen was kind enough to drop the survey link.
It looks like we're
into the chat.
Isabel,
sorry. I was just going to ask one follow-up question to that. And thank you for that response. That was really, really informative and insightful. Yeah. With regards to people putting, what's your thought on LinkedIn when people put their profile, like what they do, you'll see like a variety of like 3 or 4 different expertise, from tech guru to startup mentor to whatever, et cetera, et cetera. How many is too many?
That's a good point. I would say the people that put that, maybe they're less concerned about, let's say, getting their next opportunity. Maybe they're already happy where they're at. I am one of those people that has a couple of things up there, right? Because we write for a couple of publications. We have School16, we have our podcast. Instead of worrying about that, what I would do is I would look up 5 to 10 profiles of people in positions that you admire, or people in positions that you want to land. So if that means, let's say, product management, then you should do that for a particular industry, and see how they talk about themselves on their profile. Again, you don't have to reinvent the wheel, but you can straight up emulate them. And oftentimes that will give you a lot more insight than trying to guess what the best practice is.
Terrific. Thank you.
Yeah.
Now, Isabel has a question about you're going to be interviewing for a product marketing role, it sounds like, or a marketing role under the product marketing team in a financial services app. And you're wondering what related experience and questions they might have. This is a bit of a very, very specific question. I encourage you to maybe send us an email, info@school16.co, and maybe we can dive a little bit deeper into that. But I'll tell you one quick thing. Product marketing typically is all about knowing how to position new products to do launches for companies. So every company likes to develop new product and launch them into new markets. So what is it about your experience that you can demonstrate that you have an ability to either communicate the value of a product to somebody, you have the ability to launch a product to a certain small audience and test it, to be able to adjust the messaging and the like. So it's really about communicating the value of a new product that may have not existed before, and having it and testing it with audiences, essentially.
Yeah, and a quick way to cheat, by the way, in these conversations is ask them what the people in that role did before. What did they like about somebody that was in that role, or why did somebody not work out? And again, they're going to start giving you hints, and while they're talking to you, you can think about stories that are relevant to bring up And essentially, by the way, that's what you do in sales, right? You listen to the customer, you think about their pain points, and you bring them up throughout the conversation. The same thing is happening in an interview. You're trying to guess or understand what this particular interviewer's pain points are, and then bring up how there are some relevant things that you may have done in your experience that are going to excite them.
Great. But congrats on the interview as well.
Thank you. That's very helpful.
For sure.
Of course.
I'll send you
Okay.
an email afterwards.
Yeah,
So,
sure. Absolutely.
Thank you.
And also our emails are first name at school16.co. So
There you go.
easy to guess.
You gave away the secret.
Yeah.
All right. Awesome. Well, thank you all. It was great getting to know you. My dog is getting a little bit impatient here, so I think we're going to have to.
Why don't we show Pumpkin to the folks that stuck around until the end?
We'll show Pumpkin because she's like, why are you picking me up?
She's
She's adorable. And she was a very patient girl for an hour and 15 minutes. But,
Pumpkin.
Say hi to Hannah, Pumpkin. She says hi. All right.
She usually likes being the center of attention. But thank you folks for staying until the very end. We appreciate it. And again, if you fill out the survey, we'll of course follow up with the video and the slides as well. But thank you so much. It's a pleasure meeting you if it's your first time, and we hope to see you at the next event. You'll get an email about it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Bye.